The Vietnam veterans have been camping on the Capitol Mall despite the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court's ruling against them to spend the night there without any police action. Despite the fact that hundreds of veterans were seen asleep in their bedrolls in the 40-degree temperature last night, and on front-page photographs of today's newspapers, when asked if the veterans could be evicted for violations, spokesman for the police department chuckled and said they observed no one sleeping in the park or otherwise breaking the rules of the injunction. The sleeping and camping prohibition is in effect only between the hours of 4:30 p.m. to 9 a.m. The Vietnam veterans decided to vote democratically by state delegations on three alternatives. 1, to stay on the mall all night but not to sleep, thereby avoiding arrest. 2, to leave the mall at 4:30 in the afternoon and find some other place to camp. Or 3, to remain on the mall and sleep there, thus making themselves liable to arrest. The total vote by those veterans who were present at the time was 400 in favor of remaining awake during the night and 480 in favor of sleeping. No one voted to leave the campsite. The Colorado delegation voted to spend the night but not to be caught sleeping and thus avoiding arrest. With the majority voting to make themselves liable to arrest, the rest of the delegations agreed to consent to the majority vote as a sign of togetherness. The veterans have been making headway in the Congress here, and their credibility has been maintained and even reinforced. Yesterday afternoon, a dozen congressmen came down to the mall to address the veterans. They told the vets that their congressional offices would be open all night to any who wished to sleep in them. The veterans feel that the park issue is a ploy by the Justice Department to sidetrack the real issue and to factionalize them. But the vets are here for one purpose, an important one, to end the war. It looks like nothing has been able to deter them from their goal. This morning, the 2-inch front page headlines of the Washington papers read, "Veterans Overrule Supreme Court." Concerning the lobbying action here being done by the veterans, virtually every senator and representative has been talked to at least once by a delegation of Vietnam veterans. 27 members of the Colorado delegation met for over an hour with Senator Peter Dominic in his office this morning to tell him they felt his position on the Vietnam War only served to prolong it. Mr. Dominic felt that the Vietnamization was showing positive results. A former military advisor to the Vietnamese Special Forces told him graphically that that was not so. Then a former Army captain, also an advisor in Vietnam, explained how the pacification program was a failure. Mike Gard, a former Marine, then explained to the senator how preparations were made in Vietnam prior to any official's visit there. Gard was serving in Vietnam during Senator Dominic's first visit there, but was prevented from talking to his senator when he stopped by his unit. Concerning the self-determination of the South Vietnamese that the U.S. is supposed to be ensuring, Senator Dominic mentioned that the elections that were held in South Vietnam in 1967. Half a dozen veterans spoke up at that point, illustrating various means by which the Saigon regime rigged the election, which they personally observed. Mike Gard mentioned seeing villagers rounded up by armed troops and herded to the voting places. He said the ballots that these peasants were given had 5 choices on them. All were members of President Thieu's party, even though there were 13 political parties running for the election. Of the 4 state representatives from Colorado, Mike McKevitt seemed to be the one most affected by the Vietnam veterans. After their meeting with McKevitt yesterday, the vets felt that he was very receptive and interested in what they had to say. When the vets left the office, one of the secretaries was in tears, and McKevitt was visibly shaken from the accounts of the veterans. He asked to speak with the veterans again in more detail, and today spoke again briefly with a member of the Colorado Vietnam Veterans Against the War. A final meeting is scheduled with Representative McKevitt for tomorrow. Meanwhile, Operation Dewey Canyon 3, the name coined by the National Organization of Vietnam Veterans Against the War for the 5-day lobbying action here, has been receiving substantial news coverage with TV specials and front-page stories in all the major Washington newspapers. Over 480 newsmen and women have registered at the VVAW office on the mall. In other activities today, 110 Vietnam veterans sat down on the steps of the Supreme Court building this morning and were told by police to leave. After 2 warnings, the police moved in and arrested all of them. The veterans offered no resistance and were taken away in buses singing "America, America" and the Star-Spangled Banner. Bond was originally set at $500 for each obstruction of justice, but was later reduced to a $10 fine for each civil disobedience. They are now all out of jail. Requests for the money to cover the fines and any bail has been received by many individuals and groups, including a VFW post in Massachusetts. In the first 3 hours after the arrest, $10,000 had been raised for bail. Tomorrow at 1:30 in the afternoon, the Vietnam veterans will testify before Senator George McGovern's Subcommittee on War Crimes. Then they will individually turn in their war medals one by one. The process is expected to take several hours. Friday is the final day of lobbying by the Vietnam veterans before they return to their respective states. Some have chosen individually to stay in Washington for the massive anti-war rally on the 24th. The totally nonviolent aspect of the Vietnam veterans during the past 4 days has set a fine example for those other people who will be attending the upcoming May Day demonstrations. This is Ralph Swain reporting from Washington, D.C. for KCSU-FM News.